Wrath Aeon of Ruin was one among many projects announced in the wake of Dusk's monumental success. Besides Ultra Kill, that was probably the game I was looking forward to the most at that point in time. Developed by 3D Realms themselves, and self-proclaimed Quake scene vets, whatever that means, the combat was looking crisp and satisfying, and the atmosphere was shaping up to be a twisted dark fantasy nightmare. Speaking of nightmares, I don't know what was going on behind closed doors, but the development process of this game was clearly a nightmare too, in retrospect. The initial trailer dropped on the 7th of March 2019. It was mere months until we saw some proper gameplay, and another mere months until the game launched in early access. It was just over a year since the project was revealed, when the first release date was announced, February 25th, 2021. And then it was delayed. 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 And then the final real release date was announced, 27th of February 2024. And then I was over it. Between the initial announcement and the full release, I've played such boomer shooters as Amid Evil, Ion Fury, Nightmare Reaper, Postal Brain Damaged, Prodeus, and Project Warlock. I genuinely even missed the full release, and didn't buy it until months later, when it was on a steep discount. The fantasy of playing Wrath had worn off, and I just wasn't excited anymore. This, too, will be a pattern throughout the video. Now look, I'm not saying the game should have been out in 2021, because it clearly wasn't ready then. I'm mostly talking about this because Wrath just isn't very good. All of the games I've listed off in the previous paragraph do something better than Wrath. Combat, level design, aesthetics, atmosphere, progression, spectacle, music, and they came out earlier. Is this really what we've been waiting 5 years for? I don't want to be too mean, because a huge amount of work has clearly gone into making this game. But I want to talk about my feelings frankly. Remember that quote from that Halo developer who said you can stretch 30 seconds of fun across an entire game? That quote is about gameplay loops. That is the process of switching between different actions in your game. If you have 30 solid seconds of real fun, you've got a gameplay loop. Wrath feels like 5 seconds of fun stretched across 2 games. It is more repetitive than editing out my breaths and sighs from the audio recordings of my videos, and about as monotonous. The combat seemed enjoyable in the trailers, but it doesn't pan out this way in practice. There are barely any proper arenas, and most of the gameplay just revolves around walking between rooms and killing whatever enemies are there, rinse and repeat. The movement feels kind of similar to Quake. You can bunny hop in basically the same way, but you don't gain any acceleration in the air. Instead, the alternate attack on your starting melee weapon can be used to dash forward, and bunny hopping lets you preserve this additional momentum. This is probably the most fun and unique part about this game, and I found myself switching from active firearms to this one weapon just so that I can get a bit of movement going. Unfortunately, this fun did not persist through the entire game. The levels become increasingly cramped, and instant death pits are commonplace. I also found myself frustrated at how simply descending some stairs or a small ridge isn't programmed properly and sends your character sliding through the air instead of just taking a simple step down. This becomes a significant problem, especially in episode 3. Furthermore, the predominant strategy to fight becomes hiding behind a corner and momentarily peeking out to take a shot. This is for reasons we'll get to shortly. I was trying to figure out how to structure this review, and I think I have to get the elephant in the room out of the way immediately, because it affected my entire playthrough, and every single decision I made was done through the lens of this one specific feature. I played on the hard difficulty, and I didn't find the game too demanding. I can only think of one fight in the entire game where I felt genuinely challenged as far as pure combat goes. However, it seems like the ammo economy wasn't balanced properly here, and I frequently found myself drained. That is, until I figured out how to use the super shotgun. It's a very good weapon. The sound and animations are satisfying, as are the visual effects of firing. Unfortunately, there is an alt-fire. This one singular attack does so much damage to the game because it does so much damage in the game. It requires to be charged up, and fires out 2 fragmentation bombs. It's not like this attack is wildly overpowered, but the problem is how disproportionately ammo efficient it is. If you play on hard, you have to use it if you want your guns to be fed. It's also got great range, which is a luxury in the first episode. Most of the time in combat will be spent either charging up the attack or reloading the shotgun for another. And this is a huge shame because there is a very interesting weapon selection that I feel doesn't get to shine the way the game is designed presently, and the combat becomes so incredibly boring and slow-paced. The Ruination Blade is your starting melee, and the alt fire is very sweet indeed. The coolest function is the aforementioned mobility aid. Besides a speed increase, it can also be used to extend your jumps, which is reflected in the level design too, as many areas must be reached with said technique. The only real problem is that this kicks open the door to several sequence breaks and unintentional skips. The revolver is the generic starting pistol that quickly starts to not pull its weight. The only real advantage it's got is range, in a part of the game not many weapons share such accuracy. The Fang Splitter is a very fun take on a nail gun, and it feels very satisfying to use. However, like many weapons in the game, it chews through your ammo supply quickly, and the pickups do an awful job at resupplying you. This is even with the caveat that 2 very common enemy types drop fangs upon death. The Retcher is some kind of alternative grenade launcher type of weapon, and it doesn't have the damage output or AoE reach one would expect. It's a mainstay in the early levels just for quickly taking out individual weak enemies, but also drops off in effectiveness quickly. The Super Shotgun and Slag Cannon are the last weapons available in Episode 1, the latter of which being one of your most powerful options. It quickly fires small pellets with low accuracy, but great damage. It runs out of ammo fast, but it's warranted in this case for how quickly it takes out strong targets. In Episode 2, we also get access to one of the weakest sounding railguns I've ever used. But it is a right and proper railgun, with great damage and range, and this is another case where ammo scarcity is justified. The Crystallizer is one of the most fun and unique weapons in any FPS. The primary fire works like a standard lightning gun, with a straight beam of damage, which can arc to another nearby target. It's an alright attack, but it's the alt fire that really sets it apart. You can charge up a burst to instantly crystallize an enemy, and now using the primary attack will refract additional rays to surrounding targets. It's such a fun and unique concept, but hardly practical. The more dangerous enemies tend to move around too much and be too dangerous to approach to use this tactic effectively. But then weak enemies can be easily felled with anything else. Even your melee weapons have good crowd control. And speaking of melee, the final weapon is the Mace of Devastation, which probably is meant to be an equivalent to the BFG. Killing enemies with the primary attack lets you absorb their souls. Using the alt fire unleashes said souls in a miasma of devastating homing projectiles. The weapon variety is there, but the balancing is off. Let's compare them with the Super Shotgun's alt fire. The Revolver and Retcher don't have the damage. The Railgun and Slag Cannon are powerful, but ammo is too scarce to be used commonly. The Fang Splitter and Crystallizer are balanced weapons, but run out of ammo extremely quickly, for how little ammo you get to pick up. The melee weapons are too situational to be considered in most encounters. The shotgun's primary fire itself is short range and deals less damage than I'd expect. This leaves the alt fire to be the far and away best option for most situations. The level design also doesn't facilitate any exciting combat encounters. In this way, it reminds me of Quake 2. You walk into a room with one or more mid-tier enemies. Anything above the common fodder already is tanky enough that you have to spend significant time taking it down. The powerful weapons run out of ammo quickly, and the weak ones don't have the damage output, so you're left with taking meat shots with the super shotgun in the most boring back and forth imaginable. Enemies such as this Cacodemon stand-in or this lava golem thing are quite tanky, and the game loves to throw lots of them at you. Every single level has parts where the pacing comes to a crashing halt, because you need to throw most of your ammo supply fighting a bullet sponge. And speaking of levels, I'm very unimpressed. I'm finding it extremely difficult to remember more than a few situations and set pieces, from the entire game. There's barely any scripted events or genuinely unique locations. Most of the time, you'll just be walking from one room to a slightly different room, taking out the enemies one by one, and moving to another slightly different room. There's only a few proper arenas in the entire game, and that's what really forces you into the boring, conservative playstyle that boomer shooters should avoid like the plague. I have an extremely lengthy critique on Doom Eternal, but despite complaining so much about that game, the arenas were doing wonders for the combat. Can you imagine how boring the game would be if you could pick off every enemy before even getting close? That's kind of what Wrath feels like. Arenas are not exactly necessary, however. Let's analyze how one level in Dusk manages to stay memorable and unique. E3M2 starts with you having to use a temporary power-up to get across a pit of lava. Then you fight some enemies, then you enter this huge iconic structure, where you must descend down a lava fall with small patches of rock and jump pads. Then you get a short ambush, climb up the walls, fight some more enemies, before emerging into an ice-touched zone and pick up a key off a dead soldier. You descend down underground again, fight some more enemies, and then actually walk out onto the frozen surface. Another key is locked inside the cage amidst some ruins. You must explore scattered remains of this village to click all buttons and then get swarmed by a group of new flying enemies. You descend back whence you came again and finish the level. If you want to be uncharitable, you can boil it down to walking between rooms and killing enemies too. But you can't escape the fact that this level is memorable and imaginative. When it comes to episode 1 of Wrath, I remember this swampy level, where you climb around some wooden structures suspended on trees, one level with a big tree, this one really long snowy graveyard section, and this one level with a medieval town of sorts. Everything else blends together into a repetitive slug of unremarkable catacombs or caves. Dusk felt like 100 unique ideas condensed into a 30-level game, while Wrath feels like 5 unique ideas stretched across a 20-level game? I'm not quite sure on that count. I think it's also a good moment to mention the actual structure of the game. You start with a tutorial level, and then the rest is divided into 3 hubs, with a few levels each you can tackle in any order, and culminating in one boss fight for each hub. I feel like the ability to play levels however you like does some harm to the game. For example, I was having ammo problems in episode 1. I didn't realize that only in the final level of this hub I've played is the previously mentioned and powerful slag cannon. I also remember the first major fight of the first level being a slug, as I only had the revolver and blade to work with. It wasn't too hard as there was plenty of room to move around. It just took forever. For how little there is unique and imaginative about this game, it is difficult to believe how long it is. I don't remember how much time episode 1 took me to complete, but the entire game came out to near 21 hours. After beating the first hub and boss, I was getting kind of bored and tired. Therefore, I almost winced when I saw what I just completed was merely the first of, presumably 3, hubs. Episode 2 has a different visual aesthetic and quickly introduces 2 new weapons, along with 2 new enemies. Still, the majority of encounters will be with exactly the same foes you've already been fighting for a few hours at least. Design-wise, these levels feel similar to the predecessors, while being even longer and more confusing. Again, only a few memorable set pieces. And if you are getting tired of the enemy roster, fear not, because episode 3 completely forgets about the previous additions and adds in 2 different enemies instead. The hub in this episode also feels so excessively sprawling and complicated. It was a challenge just to find some of the levels. Another flaw with the structure is how this episode introduces 1 new weapon, but said introduction must be remixed in every single level, as it's a very special weapon, the Mace of Devastation. Thankfully, this episode is a lot more generous with ammo for your more powerful weapons, which livens up the combat a bit. Throughout the campaign, there's barely any feeling of escalation or progression. You find and encounter most weapons and enemies respectively within the first level you play, and every new level and episode barely has anything new in store. Amid Evil had completely unique enemy rosters for each of its 7 episodes. I think that approach might be a bit excessive in the other direction, but surely the best compromise lies somewhere between the two. Okay, let's start wrapping things up. One aspect of combat I haven't mentioned yet is the power-ups. Though maybe they're more appropriately described as equipment, as none of them feel as powerful as something like quad damage in Quake/Doom. They're little trinkets, such as a temporary lifesteal effect, a black hole grenade, or a gaseous elixir, which turns enemies against each other. I found little use for them, as fights rarely feel properly challenging, and many of them don't help with amplifying your ammo management, which is the hardest enemy of this game. The confounding Atar is a word, or so I'm told. More relevantly, it kind of helps with this problem, but it's hard to use. It doesn't actually turn an enemy to your side, they will still attack you if they've got no better targets. To get any mileage out of this equipment, you have to use it in the heat of combat, when other power-ups might be more helpful, such as the Orb of Deflection. The Rage Serum does increase your damage temporarily, but it's extremely rare and completely non-existent in Episode 1, where the ammo economy is at its worst. And you know why the battles generally aren't very hard? That's right, we're talking about the saving system again. You see, manual quick saves are limited in quantity and must be found as soul tethers. There are also shrines already placed in levels, which can be used only once, to save and refill your health to 100, but there tends to be a mere 1 or 2 per level. There is also an autosave whenever you transition between levels. The kicker is that you can only load the most recent save of each type. You can probably see where I'm going with this. When I was playing through the first level of episode 3, it finally happened. I fell into lava and wanted to press F3 to load the game. However, I fat-fingered F2, which quicksaved the game instead. My quicksave was now softlock, so my two options were to either go back to a shrine somewhere in the middle of the level and try to piece out where I had to go from there, or start the entire level, on which I've spent close to an hour by this point, from scratch. I quit the game and couldn't be bothered to go back for entire months. Now look, it was my fault for pressing the wrong key, and it was my fault for not swapping the key bindings too. However, the much bigger fault is that of the developers who chose this default key layout and designed the save system. I get it, you don't want people to abuse quick saves, but why not just give us automatic checkpoints at this point? The number one reason why I was quitting out of wrath was because I died and lost a lot of progress, whether by me forgetting to save or getting greedy and dying soon before I was intending to save. With automatic saves, you will neither forget to save, and the level designers can also ensure you won't lose too much progress. I know this is something I've whined about for several reviews now, but for the love of God, give us any story whatsoever. In Wrath, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know why I'm doing it, I don't know who I'm fighting or why, I don't know what the stakes are, and I don't know why I should care. The final boss fight is against the dreadful one, who actually turns out to be this guy, the only NPC in the entire game who does nothing beyond spouting some cryptic and vague bullshit, which actually gives no background whatsoever. And I'm supposed to care? It's obvious this was meant to be some grand reveal that totally recontextualizes everything in the game so far. But there's just nothing. I've played custom Doom and Quake level packs with more story than this. I know it's a boomer shooter, but there could be so much more grandiosity in this final twist, if there was anything. And what happens in the end? You just sail back out onto the sea, the same way you came. What has changed? What will happen now? Silence. Last thing to complain about. Take a look at these trailers and tell me what you see, or rather hear. That's right, blaring metal. Now tell me what you hear in the game. That's right, ambience. It's good ambience, but it's always ambience. Even during the most intense battles and even boss fights. It's always fucking ambience. Where is the metal? Where is any semblance of sound anywhere close to the transition block on the periodic table, shredding my ears so that my smooth brain, dulled by antidepressants and a lifetime of disappointment, can feel a tinge of excitement? The music here was made by Andrew Hulsholt, who gave us bangers such as these. In reality, it's not about the metal. I can accept a lot of different music styles for a boomer shooter, but for God's sake, combat has to be exciting, and the internal ambient music is a big reason why it eternally is not. Right, I think this script is getting too long and bloated. Much like a certain game I'm not going to name, I really want to find something positive to say about Wrath. And I think the most compelling part to me when I started out was that the combat felt pretty crisp. The sound, particle and blood effects firmly place it among other throwback shooters. It's a shame the actual flow and pacing is so dull, and the game is too fucking long. For aspiring game devs, it really makes a huge difference to have a clear idea for the game mechanics, pick at least one novel idea to build an identity around. Wrath did not have such an idea, and the best it can hope to achieve is mediocrity and eventual obscurity. Thanks for watching.